Okay. So this morning I want to talk about losing control. And first I want to kind of touch on what that looks like in the world, because that's not going to be what I'm talking about. You know, when we look at our daily lives and kind of how the world sees losing control, there's probably more than just two, but the most common two that people experience is the sense of losing control and the actual physical losing control. And so, of course, there are, doctors and fields out there that try to specialize in this. And though they're probably going after the right things, the treatment of it is obviously not the right treatment, right? We know that if somebody is dealing with something that has to do with any type of mental health, it's going to be some sort of demonic influence, right? Some sort of wound, some sort of something that has allowed the enemy to come in and change something about them, right? And so the sense of losing control and the actual physical losing control, those have to do with fear and anxiety. Those are the things that we start experiencing when we have trouble with losing control. But again, it may be on the right topic, but it's not the right treatment. But today, that's not really the type of losing control that I want to talk about. I want to talk about losing control according to the way God says about losing control. Losing control is both internal and external. The external losing control is when this house of cards that we've built, right? This kingdom that we've built up for our lives, right? That's going to start to shatter when you lose control externally. And internally, when we lose control, it's when we begin to yield to the Spirit of God and our soul and body become committed to the Lord's ways. According to the Bible, there is literally a process of activation when we lose control. In other words, the Lord has designed us to hand everything over to Him or lose control, and it is only through that act that we can activate the freedom that He promises us. We have to be willing to lose control for God. One of the primary reasons that Jesus came, though it was many, one of the primary ones was to bring forth liberty. When Jesus first announced His ministry, if you remember the story, He was in the synagogue and He read a portion of Isaiah 61. He read, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." So Jesus came to proclaim liberty. He was proclaiming liberty and jubilee over all people now that He announced Himself as a Messiah. And as you guys remember in that story, He was not received very well after He did that. They were trying to kick Him out of the town after He did that. Isn't this Joseph's son? What is he saying? It was so profound, I don't even think they probably understood that He was literally speaking into existence those words. He was fulfilling that prophecy, but He had to speak into existence those words. So in Proverbs 18, we know that it says death and life are in the power of the tongue. So Jesus, not as the Son of God, but as the Son of Man, literally spoke into existence a flow of liberty. The word that is used in the Bible literally means a flowing of freedom. There's now an open flow of freedom like a river. And by Him speaking it, it activated it. So I want to make sure you understand, Jesus came to give a flowing freedom from the oppression of sin and bondage. And all we have to do is yield ourselves inside and out to the Spirit of God. That's it. And it activates that freedom in our life. When we lose control to God, when we give that over to God, this activates freedom in our life. But not just freedom. It is within the flowing freedom of Jesus that we also find transformation. 2 Corinthians 3:17 and 18 says, "Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord. So what we learn in the scripture is that once the veil is removed from our face, we can then mirror the glory of God and be transformed into his image through the flow of freedom. But that's interesting to me. Very interesting. We were created in God's image. So why would we need to be transformed back into his image? There's something there that we need to understand. If we were created in God's image, why would we need a flowing freedom and transformation back into the same image that we were created in? I'd like to propose that when we walk in bondage and when we walk in rebellion, this actually removes the image of God that we were created in, or it covers it, or it changes it, right? He gave us free will to choose. And when we step into rebellion, when we step into bondage, we are literally transforming ourselves, not just spiritually or figuratively, but physically. We begin to transform ourselves away from the image of God, right? Healing is in God. Sickness is not. So when we start being transformed into sickness because of what we're walking in, we're being transformed away from the image that we were created in. So first and foremost, we have to understand that we have that ability, that power within us to take away the image of God that we were created in, or to transform it away. Or why else would we need the power of the freedom of Christ to be able to transform back to that? To be transformed, it means to literally go through an actual a change in actual form, appearance, or character. That is what transformation is about. And I believe in our walk with God that it can be all three at the same time, right? Physical form, our appearance, or the character within us. Does anybody know that the devil hates us because he tried to be like God? And by doing that, he was cast out of heaven. And then what does God do? He creates man in his image, almost in spite, or to spite the enemy. I don't think that's why he did it, but, right? Here's the enemy being thrown out of heaven. Man, I was trying to be like God and I got thrown out. Hey, who's that? That looks just like God. He was just created. What the heck? So that's going to breed even more hate. It's going to piss him off even more. Not that that matters, but I just want to point that out. That he was thrown out of heaven for trying to be like God. And here we come being created in the image of God. So, if that's the case, then why are we surprised when the enemy's strategy is to take that image away from us? To transform us into something that has nothing to do with the image of God. Because he cannot stand the image of God. He hates the image of God so much. We remind him of God so much. And the fact that he is chained and he cannot do anything. And he's on a clock. He only has so much time. He knows all this. And so when he looks at us, it enrages him because he sees the image of God. So he wants to change that. He wants to take that image out of us or transform it from our appearance or our form or our character. He wants to take it to some other place that has nothing to do with God. I think it drives him nuts. But this is a serious concern that we must be aware of, that we can be changed in a way that we need transformation to get back. We have to be aware of the fact that there is a propensity there to change who we are. And that if we really want to be able to walk with God and carry his image, then we have to allow ourselves to be transformed back to it. When Adam and Eve walked in rebellion against God, this required that God be just and hold them accountable. He's a good God. He's a just God. And so he's going to hold them accountable for their rebellion. And that later led to the law, which is the clearest depiction for us that a Savior is needed. They activated the rebellion, which changed who they are. They got held accountable. Curses were brought forth because of what they did, right? They were the ones that brought that on. It changed the character of who they were, right? All of a sudden, I'm naked. I need to cover myself. And the Lord's like, who told you that? He saw what happened. These are two different people. These are not the two. They have that knowledge of that tree that I told them not to have knowledge of. They started to be changed. I love the saying. Adrian Rogers once was preaching, and I heard it, and I'll never forget it. He said, "You're never more like the devil than when you live in rebellion." And so when we activate rebellion in our lives, that is when we begin to take on a different image, not the image we were created in. We become transformed into evil, and we have to remember that. We have to be aware of that. What's the point? Glad you asked. The point is that we must understand that our current state of being, living in a fleshly body while in a dark, fallen world, has literally removed the very image we were created in from us when we partner with that. When we do not become healed of the things that are in our lives. When we commit sin, anything that goes against God or his ways is literally going to put us in a place where we do not look like what we were created to look like. So therefore, it is no longer by birth that we have the image of God. Our spirit, of course, is untainted, right? That is still a reflection of God, but it's our flesh, our hearts. Those no longer have or resemble the image of God because it requires we regain that image somehow. And that can only happen through transformation, which only comes through that flowing freedom that I was talking about. We have to lose control in our lives by giving over to God, yielding to God, both internally and externally, everything in our life to activate that freedom, which will then transform us to start to walk with God and be the image of God from glory to glory to glory. That's how it happens. By losing control and giving it over to God, we allow the Messiah Jesus to place his home upon us, right? It is through this connection to his yoke that he leads us and keeps us at his pace, right? Just like an oxen, when you put a yoke on an oxen, they can't do what they want anymore. They're tied into that. And it's not about God wanting to control you, right? He's not this control freak in heaven that's like, come on, let me control you. Put this on so I can control you. No, he wants us to give it over to him. His yoke is light. But when we embrace that yoke, now all of a sudden, he's going to direct us. Hey, you need to start turning this way. You need to turn away from this thing. My yoke is turning you away from death and into life. That's the point, is when we give him that control, he will direct us. We will walk at his pace, right? We're not going to go ahead of everybody else. We're going to be right there with him in step. By show of hands, how many here have ever swam in the ocean? I've swam in the ocean. I grew up in California, about 20 minutes from the coast by the Monterey Bay, and I used to go all the time as a kid, almost every weekend during the summer, to the beach and swim in the very cold Pacific Ocean. It was a lot of fun. There were a lot of times where it wasn't really the summer and we came out looking purple and we just couldn't help it. We just wanted to keep swimming because it was so much fun and the water's like 50 degrees or whatever. It was freezing. You kind of get used to it. You kind of go numb. Okay, so for those of you who have swam in the ocean, and if you put your feet in the ocean, that's kind of swimming, right? But I mean like swimming, where maybe you can touch the ground, maybe you can't, right? Where you're like in the water type of swimming. If you've ever had that experience, how many of those people have ever had a wave crash over them? Double time. I had so many times where I was doing boogie boarding or just body surfing where you're not paying attention because you're having so much fun, and then next thing you know, boom, and it just overtakes you, right? The wave just overcomes you. And think about that feeling in that moment when you're in that wave, the power of that water. You have no control whatsoever. When that wave hits you, you have no control. You don't even know which way is up sometimes. That's how much out of control you are. And that wave is going to do with you what it wants. It's going to twist you, turn you, pull you, slam you into the ground, whatever, right? You have this feeling where you don't know what's coming next because you're completely out of control, right? You don't know what's going on because you're completely out of control. Now, take that image of being in that wave that just slammed on you, the power of that water, right? That overtakes you and puts you in a place where you don't know which way is up. And now think of the love of God being like a wave. That love of God is so powerful that when it truly hits you, it is going to overcome you in a way where its power is so heavy that you feel like you cannot do anything in a good way. It is going to shake everything up in your life to the point where you don't know which way is up. And sometimes in the beginning of walking with God, even when we're overwhelmed with His love, it can feel like, okay, God, what are you doing? Where are we going here? Jesus, what's going on, right? And that's because His love is so powerful. It's so powerful when it overtakes us. It basically swallows us up. That's how powerful God's love is. But once you're under this power, think about it. There's no possible way, if you truly submit to this love, there's no way you can be in control. There's no way, just like under the wave. Even if I had tried to swim, I don't even know which direction I'm swimming, let alone trying to get to the top. So in a good way, God's love overtakes us with power, right? With peace, with mercy, with grace, all these wonderful, wonderful things that God brings to us. And if we are yielding to Him, we get to a place where we realize that there's nothing we can do to now dictate our life. There's nothing we can do to push forward. Do we still have free will? Yes. I'm saying if we truly yield to that love, we want that wave to now take us wherever it's going to go. We get into a place where we yield. Just like the best thing to do when you get hit with a wave is to not freak out and not try to swim. Is to just hold still. Literally, I was taught that as a kid. If a huge wave, I had like 6-foot waves hit me. Like I had some big ones hit me when I was a kid to the point where it hurt. And what I was taught is when you get caught up in that, you just hold still and you let it do its thing. Right? And then at some point, you're going to come to the surface. And I feel like there's a lot of wisdom there. When we yield to God and we allow His love to start transforming our life, sometimes that even feels chaotic because there's so many things in our life that need to change. And when He starts doing that, in the natural, it can feel chaotic. But really, He's positioning us to where He wants us. He's now exposing us to a freedom, right? Getting things out of our lives that don't need to be there. Getting people out of our lives that don't need to be there. All these different things, right? And at some point, as you yield, you start to get it. You start to understand the beauty of God's love. And then He takes you where He has for you. So this concept of allowing God's love to kind of swallow us up is difficult because we have to become vulnerable. We have to open up and expose our hearts to God and become vulnerable to who He is. And when we lose control to God, we're really handing Him over the keys. And when you do that for real, like you really open your heart to God and you really give Him your all, you're exposing yourself to vulnerability. We're used to the world's version of love, which usually is going to end in heartbreak. If not heartbreak, disappointment. I don't care how beautiful a marriage is. If you're married to another person, which you should be, right? They're a person, they're going to let you down. At some point, they're going to disappoint you. They're going to do something that hurts you. It's not because they're mean or filled with evil. It's just because that's what our propensity is as humans. If we do not keep our flesh in check, then we are not going to be able to walk in that. But again, every person will let you down because that's the world's version of love. And now there's even worse world versions of love, right? They're becoming so morphed into who knows what of what love is. Love is an outward expression. The world sees it as an inward, what can you do for me? So when we become vulnerable to God, it requires trust because we're not going to know what's coming next. We're not going to know necessarily what He's up to or what He wants to do in us. It starts to become more and more obvious as you walk with Him, and you can start to trust Him because He is very careful with our hearts. But you have to be willing to become vulnerable to Him. Things like wholeness and restoration are found in his love. If you stay the same after experiencing the love of God, you haven't truly experienced the love of God. You cannot stay broken under the love of God. You just can't. It's not possible. You've made up in your head what you think is the love of God if you're still broken. You haven't actually experienced the love of God. But it's when we lose that control to God and we completely yield to him and begin to operate in the flow of freedom that he gives, it is through that freedom that we can find the love of God and become transformed back into his image. I think all of us here could probably say that you've seen somebody who has been transformed either positively or negatively in the spirit, right? Whether they have something come out of them and all of a sudden they physically change, their demeanor changes, or somebody has something in them evil and you can just see it on them, right? That's the transformation I'm talking about, where if we are not aware of what we're doing, we're removing the image of God and we're taking on some other image. But it doesn't just start and end there, right? Moses' face was glowing from the glory of God that was upon him when he had that mountaintop experience. He had been transformed even more into God's image, to the point where people were afraid. It was so distracting he had to cover his face. That's the type of transformation that God can bring if we're really willing to yield and commit ourselves. So I want to encourage you today to commit yourself and give yourself over to God's control, even more than you have already. Doesn't matter how much we've given to God. We can always yield more. We can always give more to God. We can always say, Lord, show me the spots, the areas where I'm missing it. Help me to see, because I want that freedom. I want that transformation. I want to be able to look like your image that I was created in. Let's allow our hearts and minds to be transformed back to that image and lose control as we operate in that freedom. If you would stand, I'd like to pray for y'all.